Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, September the 13th, 2024. So I live in Western Washington State, and here there are no poisonous snakes. If you want poisonous snakes in this state, you have to go east of the Cascade Mountains, and then there are rattlesnakes. And I've come from the UK. The UK does actually have one species of poisonous snake, the adder, and the adder is sort of ubiquitous to Europe and Asia, and particularly North Asia, Siberia. You even get adders above the Arctic Circle in Norway, but I think I've only seen an adder once in my life, at least a live one. I think it was on the motorway in France a long, long time ago. So I don't really know much about poisonous snakes, and I don't have any experience of them, but I'm interested in them. There are lots of YouTube videos about people playing with poisonous snakes, and there was one incident that happened recently, very recently. So a man called Jeffrey Leibowitz kept poisonous snakes. Apparently he kept his poisonous snakes in a really poor condition, and this was in South Carolina. And he had arguments with the snake keeping community, who thought he was a bit cavalier with the way he handled his snakes. I mean, he literally handled his snakes. He had videos of himself picking up rattlesnakes, and he got hold of an inland taipan, and so that inland taipan is apparently the most poisonous snake in the world, or maybe in the top 2 most poisonous snakes in the world. And the inland taipan is native to Australia. If you're from Australia, I'm sure you're very aware of this, and it tries to keep out of people's way. And it's really, really poisonous. The reason it's poisonous, apparently, is because it needs to kill its prey very, very quickly. And anyway, he was playing with an inland taipan, a juvenile inland taipan, at kind of 2 o'clock in the morning. And it bit him. And the snake community take the view that he was not being very sensible, and it took 12 hours for a hospital to get anti-venom, and I think the reason there wasn't much anti-venom around is because all the anti-venom had been used from a previous inland taipan bite in the United States. So perhaps it's more dangerous being bitten by an inland taipan in the United States than it is being bitten by one in Australia, where it's native. And so made me think about snake bites and the astrology of snake bites. So I didn't, unfortunately, have the horoscope of Jeffrey Leibowitz, but still I set up a chart for when he was bitten. And then I thought, well, why don't I look at examples of other people who've been bitten by snakes and who have died as a result of being bitten by snakes? So what I'm doing in this video is I'm just looking at examples of people bitten by snakes. They are herpetologists in the main, people who are investigating snakes, researching snakes, and what is it about their charts that make them interested in snakes? Why do they go for snakes? And I suspect that these herpetologists you haven't heard of, and I don't have times of birth. So I thought I would also look at someone who didn't die of a snake bite, but who liked working with snakes. As far as I could see, lots of videos of him trying to catch snakes, or not catch snakes, but getting very close to them. And that was Steve Irwin. Of course, Steve Irwin was not killed by a snake; he was killed by a stingray. Nonetheless, I thought it'd be interesting to look at Steve Irwin's chart, because I suppose people have heard of Steve Irwin, and I don't have to explain Steve Irwin like with the other herpetologists. And it was a stingray that killed him rather than a snake, but I suppose it's a similar thing, isn't it? Someone killed by a poisonous animal. Although I don't think in Steve Irwin's case it was the poison that killed him. It was just the fact that he was stabbed in the heart. But before I look at snakes, I want to consider what's happening today from a perspective of astrology and I Ching. And today is, of course, Friday, September the 13th, 2024. Now, just a reminder, if you like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indicate that you did indeed like it. And if you're not subscribed, I would be really happy if you were to subscribe. Of course, that assumes that you do like this video. So let's look at what's happening today. Now, as far as the thumbnail is concerned, that is apparently an inland taipan, and that's what they look like. And so let's see what's going on. So the moon continues to be in Capricorn. So there's the moon at 20 degrees Capricorn. I think we can regard the moon as being in Capricorn all day long. Wherever you are, it doesn't matter. That's where the moon is. And the moon does make a few aspects. The moon makes a sextile to Saturn. So you can see moon at 20 degrees Capricorn is making a sextile to Saturn in Pisces. And that is a nice aspect because, the moon in Capricorn is quite sensible. It's quite down to earth. We understand what matters. And Saturn is an energy that is quite grounding. So however complicated things are, we can bring things down to earth and understand the details that really matter. And the moon, additionally, is making a square to Venus. Now, that moon square Venus, it's a little bit difficult, perhaps. When Moon and Venus are making hard aspects, it's kind of too much of a good thing sometimes. It can be about how we relate, and there being perhaps a tension in how we relate. On one hand, Venus in Libra does like to get on with people, but Moon in Capricorn, on the other hand, is trying to consider perhaps security concerns, and it may also indicate two types of people that we might be attracted to. There's one type who is perhaps easygoing, there's another type who is sort of more sensible, more down to earth, and we kind of have to make the choice, or at least we might feel that we have to make the choice. Having said that, the Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn, and that mutual reception is, as I've been saying for the last few days, is pretty fortunate. And so maybe that moon square Venus isn't really so difficult. And in fact, the moon square Venus may actually help us to relate if we handle it in the right way. Yeah, there is a bit of a challenge, but nothing is entirely easy, but handled correctly, maybe it's not such a problem. And also, the moon is trine the sun, and as I say, moon trine the sun is a good aspect. The moon, the lights, the sun and the moon, they're in a favourable aspect, and that is really something to be welcomed. And in terms of the overall lunar cycle, we are in the waxing phase of the lunar cycle. So the moon is getting bigger. It's generally the fortunate side of the lunar cycle when it's waxing. So when you've got the moon trine sun, it just feels that things are perhaps starting to come together, and they're especially coming together from sort of a material perspective. We are becoming more grounded. We're understanding what is possible, and we are appreciating our security interests, and it's also harmonious. And if we make the effort, we can harmonize ourselves with our environment, and all things being equal from a health point of view, moon sextile sun is good. So, I'm not saying all of us are going to be healthy, but all things being equal, I would have thought we're perhaps going to be healthier than average. I often sort of emphasize health issues, but maybe Moon trine Sun, that's something that we don't have to worry about so much. That there's no reason why we shouldn't be a little bit cautious there. And simply because caution is always a good thing, isn't it? Especially now with Moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn should not be inclined to take risks, particularly with Moon sextile Saturn. That is quite sensible. Although maybe these aspects I've talked about may be a little bit boring, and we might be trying to stir things up if we possibly can. And in this light, Mercury is biquintile Pluto. So Mercury is 144 degrees from Pluto. So Mercury Pluto is about style and what we're trying to create and the impression we're trying to make. So it may be we feel that we have to make an impression, even if we don't feel that it's natural. We just have to say something. We have to get people's attention. We have to do something that gets people to sit up and listen. We have to respond. And that might be about just saying something. We make a special effort to say something that we know is going to cause a stir. That might be how Mercury biquintile Pluto actually works. Or we feel we have to really investigate something. Mercury Pluto is about investigation, getting to the bottom of things, asking questions. And that might be something we have to force ourselves to do. So that is the position of the planets set for New York. And I want to quickly look at the positions of the planets set for Sydney, Australia. Reason being because the time zones are very far apart and the positions of the planets could be a little bit different. I mean, look, the moon is at noon in New York. The moon is at 20 Capricorn. Noon, Sydney, Australia, the moon is... Sorry, I should have taken out the house cusps, but I'll keep the house cusps. Sorry, that is a snakebite chart. I don't want to look at that. I want to look at this chart. So the moon is at 12 degrees Capricorn. And so 12 Capricorn is, it's 8 degrees, 7 or 8 degrees before... before what it was in New York. And so from a perspective of Sydney, Australia, you could say, well, that moon is opposition Mars. Okay, maybe 8 degrees apart, but I think that there's going to still be a little bit of a moon-Mars feel to the day in Australia, say, compared with New York. I mean, not too much so, but there could be a little bit of anger in Australia and New Zealand and Eastern Asia that just perhaps isn't around in New York, Europe, sort of Americas, Europe. So there's a slight difference there, and the moon still makes that sextile to Saturn. So I don't actually think there is a huge amount of difference in the experience of the day's astrology between Australia and eastern United States, for example. But perhaps it's the fact that you've got that moon opposition Mars may be making a little bit of an impact in Australia, particularly at the beginning of the day. But I don't want to dwell on it. Wherever you are, the moon is in Capricorn. So let me now look at the heliocentric picture. So if we look at what's going on from a heliocentric view, let's just change the coordinate system. There we go. So Venus is now making a trine to Neptune. We started to feel that trine between Venus and Neptune yesterday, but I think it's getting quite close. Remember, it's a heliocentric chart, not a geocentric chart. Venus in Scorpio, trine Neptune in Pisces. I understand it geocentrically. Venus is in Libra, but heliocentrically it's in Scorpio. So Venus trine Neptune is quite nice. It's quite sensitive. it may be a little bit confused. We may not understand things straight away, but perhaps we shouldn't try too hard to understand things. Of course, we do have geocentrically Mercury biquintile Pluto, so some of us really are trying to get to the bottom of things, but we do have to remember with that Venus trine Neptune, there are things around that could have a somewhat confusing influence, if we are not careful. And Venus in Scorpio is actually sesquiquadrate heliocentrically Mercury. So we've got a heliocentric Mercury-Venus sesquiquadrate. And so that might be about the struggle to be able to discuss things in the right way. And it's not just us having a problem, it's perhaps organizations. If you talk to organizations, they might be trying to come over in a nice way, trying to, I don't know, put the customer first perhaps, but not really succeeding. And so there might be a certain sense of unease when people try to be nice. They try hard to be nice, but do they always succeed? And people might just come over in the wrong way. So we have to perhaps consider how we are expressing ourselves, and just because we think we're being nice and we think we're being considerate doesn't mean that we're necessarily succeeding. So perhaps we maybe just shouldn't make the effort. Sometimes one makes the effort and it just makes things worse. Okay, so now I want to consider things from a perspective of the 12 signs. Now, there isn't a great deal going on astrologically today, I should point out. We've got moon sextile Saturn, moon square Venus, moon trine the Sun. It's okay. It means something, but we don't have any dramatic aspects today. And Mercury biquintile Pluto is quite subtle, so that might be reflected in my forecasts for the 12 signs. So here we go. These are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, September the 13th, 2024. Aries. Aries, you continue to be quite concerned about the impression you are making. I think that you really want to make an impression, and you're going to want people to listen to you, and I think that you will have a certain agenda. There are things you want to achieve today, and if you don't achieve them, you could be quite disappointed. So give it everything you've got, and don't allow things to irritate you. So the moon has been making an opposition to Mars. We feel the moon opposition Mars to a very small extent, simply because moon is in Capricorn, Mars is in Cancer, so they are in opposite signs. But I think it's quite a subtle influence. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, that Moon-Mars opposition might be more of a feature, but even then its influence is waning. But still, there could be this lingering sense of irritation, and perhaps we have to do something to distract ourselves. If an irritation is starting to lose its strength, then the more we can get away from it, the better. And while it's important that we do pursue our ambitions, there are other things to consider. And there's a reminder here that Chiron is continuing to move through Aries. Chiron is a slow-moving body. It stays in a sign for a long time. And so what we have the moon in Capricorn square Chiron in Aries. And however ambitious you are, however important your agenda is, there are other things to consider. And it might actually be your own sense of justice and that you have a compassionate streak. You're not just doing things because you want to do them. You are thinking about the implications, and you're thinking about who is involved and whether it's moral, whether it's the right thing to do. And you might be aware of other people's sensibilities. And there may actually be a certain amount of empathy here. And I think, as far as empathy is concerned, Mars, your ruler, is in Cancer. When I've discussed what it means for Mars to be in Cancer, it is a water sign. I think that you are perhaps, in general, more empathetic than usual. And I think that with this moon square Chiron, you maybe have the dichotomy between, on one hand, the fact that you want to support yourself and you want to make sure that your interests is looked after. That's great. But you're not entirely selfish. You are thinking about other people, and you are thinking about their welfare. And so perhaps the challenge here is to pursue your agenda, but in such a way that other people are looked after. Though there is another way of looking at Chiron. Chiron is the maverick. Chiron likes to do things in its own way. And you're not going to want to just do what you're told. There may be a way of getting things done and pursuing your agenda in a way that is easy, but it doesn't feel right. It just feels boring. And you are going to want to spice things up a little, and you are going to want to do things which are interesting. So if there are 2 or 3 ways of doing something, you're certainly going to want to follow the path which gets you to your destination, but you're going to also want to follow the path which is most interesting and perhaps in some ways most disruptive, because a little bit of disruption, can be fun if you're an Aries. Whether or not that's a good thing to do, I don't know. I suppose, that is up to you. And, in general, with the moon making a square to Venus, Venus does represent other people, and it's not just so the moon is actually making a square to Chiron, and it's making a square to Venus. And I think that's just a reminder that if you were to be 100% selfish, which you are not going to be 100% selfish, because I think you are quite empathetic at the moment. But if you were to be 100% selfish, you would find that things just wouldn't work. There would be resistance, and I think you would be unwise to discount other people's needs and concerns. But I don't think that's something you're going to do. I think you're very aware today of the human dimension. Taurus. The moon is making a trine to the sun. It's a nice aspect, the moon being trine to the sun. The moon in Capricorn is trine the sun in Virgo. And so with that moon trine sun, it's a nice aspect. It's very easy. It's also very sensible, and it's life enhancing, and it's in earth signs. We've got moon in Capricorn, sun in Virgo. And so because it's in earth signs, then it definitely has an impact on your sign, because moon trines Taurus. The sun trines Taurus. So things are kind of moving nicely. And so things should really go your way today. In fact, you could argue that we've got a bit of a grand trine, because we've got the moon is kind of moving to a trine of Uranus. The sun is moving to a trine of Uranus. I mean, it's not an exact grand trine, but we certainly have this somewhat triangular energy going on today, which emphasizes the point that things are relatively easy, and it should be pretty straightforward in terms of getting your way. And with the moon starting to make that trine to Uranus. Okay, that moon trine Uranus is probably not going to be exact until tomorrow, but you might be picking up on it towards the end of the day. And it's about having a clear sense of your own individuality, but at the same time knowing that there are limits. You can't do completely what you want, and you do have to consider what's going on out there in the world around you. But, by and large, you can make things happen without much effort, and your overall approach to the world is going to be one that is relatively harmonious. I say relatively harmonious. The one thing you might find is that there may be views about the world, beliefs about the world, opinions, which you find slightly disconcerting. And you may be challenged to take on board a different approach, an approach that you haven't really considered, and you don't really want to try new things. Sometimes it's good not to try new things, but you're certainly being challenged to consider a new possibility that, at least on the surface, seems to threaten your overall sense of order. And so that's something that you need to bear in mind. And so, how tolerant are you going to be? I think you do need a certain level of tolerance today, because, Taurus, you haven't got all the answers. And just because you can make things happen using the old rules, using your existing knowledge, just because that works, doesn't mean that you should just plough on with it without considering alternative views. It may be a situation where the easiest approach is to do things your way, using what you know from the past without stretching yourself. And yeah, it's easy, and you can certainly achieve your goals, whatever they might be. But if you're looking for longer term security, if you want to create something which has lasting value, which doesn't have to be changed at a later date, then, Taurus, it might be a good idea to consider alternative approaches, to just consider the possibility that you haven't got all the answers. Gemini, you perhaps are of the opinion that the world is somewhat complicated. I mean, not overly complicated, but you do understand that you can't really take things at face value, and that you have to consider alternative approaches. And if you take things at face value, then you may not get very far. And at the same time, you may feel that your creative sense of fun is somehow being a little bit threatened by people perhaps that are more serious than you, or perhaps it's you having serious thoughts which are at odds with what you want to do. You'd like things to be simple, you'd like to enjoy yourself in that happy-go-lucky Gemini way, but something is bothering you. You just know that you haven't fully understood it. And if you do have that lingering feeling that something is not right, then I would trust your feelings and do some further research. You may have taken something for granted, or you may have misremembered something. You thought you'd understood something relating to the past. You thought you got it, and it had sort of been engraved in your mind. But in fact, what's engraved in your mind may not actually be correct. So there's no harm in just going over your workings and making sure that you've remembered things correctly, because in that way you might then see that, yeah, you might have made a small mistake, and so now, it's not too late to make corrections. Though, the main aspect going on today is it's a biquintile between Mercury and Pluto. So that Mercury biquintile Pluto is perhaps inviting you to do some very serious thinking. It's not the kind of thinking you immediately want to do. You perhaps have to force yourself. But if you actually really are prepared to get to the bottom of things, really ask yourself serious questions, force yourself to ask serious questions, because I don't think you're going to really fundamentally want to ask yourself serious questions, then you might really come to some very interesting results. And also with Mercury biquintile Pluto, it does mean that if you want, you can actually have quite a powerful impact on the world around you. The Mercury-Pluto pair is often connected with persuasiveness and propaganda. And with the biquintile, it doesn't mean that you are naturally persuasive today, that you're a natural propagandist. But if you make the effort to be persuasive, and if you make the effort to try to change people's minds, then I think you will be very successful, particularly if you've got a high level of planning. So if you want someone to think in a particular way, ask yourself, how are you going to make this happen? Sort of firstly, you need to sort of imagine what this person should be thinking, how you want someone to think, and then go about making it happen using the right arguments. And if you think about it and if you plan it, then I think it can happen. And I think you're going to be helped by the fact that you're going to be able to really bring to bear the power of your will. And so if you really, really want things to pan out in a particular way, if you want people to believe you, then I think that you can get them to believe you. And even if they don't believe you, you can have a big influence. Okay? Not everyone's going to like what you say, but with effort, you can actually be quite a powerful player today. So don't ignore that aspect, that biquintile between Mercury and Pluto. Another thing that I should point out is the fact that Venus is starting to make a trine to Jupiter. And this trine between Venus and Jupiter will become exact over the weekend. And I think that this Venus-Jupiter trine strikes me as being very positive for Geminis. It is in air signs, and Jupiter is in Gemini. And so you can perhaps benefit from just being yourself, finding people who support your ideas and your creativity, because Venus is strong. Venus is strongly placed. It's in mutual reception with Saturn. And because it's in mutual reception to Saturn, I think that as the week comes to a close, as you move into the weekend, if you can be positive and happy and optimistic, then I think that really you can have a big impact. And perhaps this also feeds back on to what I was saying about the Mercury-Pluto biquintile. It's about how do you make an impact? How are you persuasive? And you have to think, what do you have to do to be persuasive? And perhaps the answer is given by this Venus trine Jupiter. What you have to do is be positive. Look at the future. Look at how great the future can be. Hey, Donald Trump's a Gemini. He's got his sun in Gemini. Maybe that's my advice to him, of course, he won't be watching this, but if Donald Trump is, for example, doing any politicking over the next few days, then maybe with Venus trine Jupiter, maybe, you know, he's got to push forward a positive message. And I suppose that's what people have been saying about Trump. You know, perhaps he was too negative in his debate performance, and he was angry and negative. And Venus trine Jupiter is encouraging Geminis to be positive. That's what people want to hear, and that's how you can really persuade people to listen to you and to follow your ideas. But you don't have to be in politics. You know, whatever it is that you want, whatever you're trying to push onto people, there is a way. It can be done, Gemini. So don't think that other people are a brick wall and they can't be persuaded. Right now, they very much can be persuaded. Yeah, I understand you're tense, and I understand you do have this sort of inner aggravation that at first sight may be preventing you from expressing your positivity and optimism. But you need to break through. And I think that, you know, with a positive and optimistic approach, it may be an approach that perhaps strikes you as being a little bit facile, but it doesn't matter. The key thing is creating a situation where people listen to you, and I think they will. But at the same time, you understand that it is a complicated situation, as I was saying right at the beginning of this piece on Gemini. So, you know, I'm not saying things are simple, but somehow perhaps you have to try to make them simple, at least when you're communicating, at least when you're pushing your message. Cancer. The moon continues to move through Capricorn, and the moon is in Capricorn pretty much all day, regardless of where you are. And you know, with the moon in Capricorn, you know, you in many cases will have to continue taking into account other people, what they're saying, what they're doing, considering what kind of influence they have. And I don't think you're going to find this too much of a problem, because the moon is making a trine to the sun. And you know, that trine to the sun is very nice. And it gives you a sense of who you are, and also, you know, where you want to go and how you want to go about it. And I think that, you know, if you make the effort, people will find your influence to be, I suppose, fairly relaxing and understanding. And at the same time, Cancer, you will have a strong sense of your own priorities, you know, about, you know, what is important to you. And you know, there are things that are very important to you, perhaps of a material nature, and they may be particularly important today. So I think that you can basically take into account other people without really undermining yourself. And in fact, you should realize that other people can actually help you find security. But there is a bit of a challenge here, because the moon in Capricorn is making a square to Chiron. And I think that with this moon square Chiron, you don't want things to go entirely smoothly at some way. I mean, I understand that, yeah, Cancer is a security-orientated sign, or at least it can be. But there are times when you sometimes feel that something needs to be stirred up, that things aren't quite right as they are. And that moon opposition Chiron, and it's actually moon's making a square to Venus as well, doing things the same old way. You know, remembering Chiron can be a bit of a maverick. Moon square Chiron, moon square Venus, you're going to want to stir things up, because you're going to be of the opinion that things have gone on for long enough in a particular way, and you need to change, people need to change, and I think people's priorities need to change. Cancer is a sensitive sign, and it's sensitive to other people's suffering, perhaps, and there may be a moral dimension here, feeling that whatever's being done, it has to be done in a way that takes into account other people's feelings and sensibilities, and also their own material priorities. It's not just about your material priorities, it is about other people, and I think you will worry about other people, and I think that you have a conscience, and I think that you're going to want to take action in such a way that everyone benefits. And you may actually be very intolerant of one thing, and you may be actually very intolerant of other people's selfishness today. If you think about it, you realize that some people are perhaps too self-absorbed. Now, you may be projecting a bit, because Cancerians do look after themselves, but nonetheless, you may have picked up on something quite real. Selfish people only focusing on themselves, and this might bother you, and you might then feel that something has to be stirred up. When I think about Chiron, with this moon square Chiron, I often think of that idea about whether you're comforting the disturbed or disturbing the comfortable. Cancerians can do both, and I think I remember sort of listening to someone talking about liberation theology, and and sort of the attitude to what the Virgin Mary is, and whether liberation theology is a particular, was very strong in the 1970s in South America. Of course, we were talking about Chile quite recently. The idea that the role of the Catholic priest is not just to support the status quo, but it's also to stir things up and to look at injustices in society. And you have the distinction between is the comforting, disturbing the comfortable, and comforting the disturbed. People have guilty consciences. You make those, you tell them it's okay. That's, I suppose, comforting the disturbed. That's one approach. But disturbing the comfortable, people being complacent, and maybe that's something you need to do, even if you're not a Catholic priest. But that might be, there is that role there. And so if people are complacent, if people are thinking that everything is fine, then maybe you should tell them that it's not fine. And you might also want to jolt their consciences, because I think that some people are being selfish. And I don't think it's you being selfish. I mean, I think you're very aware of your own selfishness. We're all selfish, of course. But you're aware of your own selfishness, but more so you're very aware of other people's selfishness. And I think you may want to challenge it. Leo, there's still an emphasis on how you communicate and what you are communicating. And I think that, many Leos feel a certain urgency. They feel that there is something they have to say, and they may want to say it in quite a dramatic and even cutting kind of way that gets attention. And that's nice. It's always useful to be powerful and to be able to get right to the point, and to be able to home in on the key detail, and to push that detail, and to force people to take it seriously. And that is something you can do. But of course it can be exhausting, and there might just be a certain sort of mental agitation. You're working out, how are you going to talk to people. What kind of language do you have to use? You might have to use exaggerated language to get your way. And yeah, all of that can be exhausting. And so perhaps, Leo, you need to calm down a little, just slow things down. And also consider, what are you trying to do? And if you are aggravating people by what you say, that's hard work. On the other hand, you're quite capable of making people feel relaxed and at one with themselves. You can do it. I mean, a lot of people are feeling displaced. They don't quite know where they are, where they're going, and you can kind of make people feel at home. You do have that capacity, and perhaps that's something you should be concentrating on. And I think you're helped by the fact that there is a trine between the sun and the moon. And it doesn't matter what signs that trine is. Okay, the moon is in Capricorn and the sun is in Virgo, but there is this trine between the sun and the moon, and sun-moon trines are about harmony, and the sun is your ruler. And you can perhaps explain to people that really things are okay, provided they sort themselves out. And I think that you're going to be quite good at gently pointing out perhaps where people have gone wrong in the past, but also telling them that, if they sort it out now, everything is going to be fine. So in many respects, you can be quite a reassuring influence. And I think, with the right words and the right moves, I think, Leo, you really can get people to trust you. And really, the best way of getting people's trust is actually not to do things that are too unexpected. People actually feel a need for sameness. They want a sense of routine, a sense that there isn't a dramatic change. They don't have to deal with revolutions and turmoil. And by having a certain sameness about you, and I'm not saying you have to be boring and just focus on the past, but people need reassurance, a feeling that what happened yesterday is going to happen tomorrow, that there is a continuity. Even if you kind of know that in the end things are going to have to change, by emphasizing continuity, you're just going to be helping people to sort of calm down and relax. And yes, I mean, today there is a sense of at least there can be a sense of overall harmony, and I think that you're someone who can actually create this harmonious environment. Though one can't escape the fact that the moon is opposite. The moon is square Venus and the moon is square Chiron. And with moon square Chiron, there may come a point where you feel that some aspects of a daily routine have to be changed, have to be stirred up, because it's become rather stagnant, actually. And if you carry on with the same old routines for too long, then you're not going to be happy, and even other people are not going to be happy, and things have to be changed. And so the temptation, perhaps, Leo, going back to what I was saying right at the beginning of this piece on Leo, is to maybe say something dramatic and want to perhaps upset people with the power of your words. That's clearly not what you should be doing, but you should still perhaps be moving yourself and others towards this possibility of changing some aspect of one's daily routine, because certain daily routines have, I think, pretty much had their day, and you are very aware of that. But overall today, Leo, I don't think you should be trying to bring about dramatic change, because I don't think dramatic change can really happen. And if it can happen, then I think it would just be too disruptive. So perhaps you should not be too aggravating, and do focus on helping people relax. Because don't forget, you can't do anything. You can't change people's minds if people aren't feeling comfortable and relaxed. Virgo. Virgo, you perhaps feel a little bit tense today. And I think the reason you might feel a bit tense is because you feel that like something needs to happen, and you're not entirely sure what it is, but the way things are happening right now, the way things are progressing is just not right, and you would like to create a change, and you just also feel that the existing way of doing things is not satisfactory. And I think you're right, but I suppose the question is, how do you go about enacting this kind of change? Well, Mercury, which is your ruler, is making a biquintile to Pluto. I mean, it is a minor aspect, but there aren't any other major aspects going on today. So you could argue that Mercury biquintile Pluto becomes important because, in a way, there's nothing much to compete with it. And so with Mercury biquintile Pluto, if you're honest with yourself, you realize that you want to bring about change, and you want to do things and particularly say things which cause a change of mind and a change of approach. And if you choose the right words and you choose the right moments, then Virgo, I think that you can really have a very powerful influence, and people really are going to listen to you. And so when you're dealing with biquintiles and quintiles, you have to take things back to the root, and the root is what's going on in your mind. So you start off with an idea or just the germ of something you want to do. That's where it starts, and then you build it up. You start working on it. You start working on it firstly in your mind, and then you start to move it outwards into the world around you. And it's not about fantasy. We can have fantasies if we think about something too much, in our mind. It just becomes a mental process, but that's really not what it should be about. It should be about working out how one turns an idea into something real. And so, Virgo, you work out what influence you want to have, what impact you want to have, what words need to be said, and of course you have to work out when you're going to say them. And so you work it all out, and then you choose your moment, you get the moment right, and it just happens. And yeah, it's not entirely natural. It is somewhat contrived because, biquintiles are a very human-made aspect. They're about what human beings are trying to consciously create. And so, Virgo, it's about you trying to consciously create a particular impression. And I think you can do it. You can really have an influence. But it's not all about power today. We have a trine aspect between the moon in Capricorn and the sun in Virgo. That's a really nice aspect if you're a Virgo. And so, you've got the sun in your sign, still going through your sign, and the sun will stay in your sign for the next 9 days or so. Of course, it moves out of Virgo at the solstice. Sorry, it's not the solstice. I mean the equinox. And then this moon trine the sun is I think it's about you having a great sense of what you can do. And that is actually quite important for Virgos. Virgos can be very self-critical. They can ask themselves too many questions. They can tell themselves they're not good enough. They can tell themselves, they've got to think about other people's interests, because there is that service aspect of a sign Virgo. But Moon trine the Sun is about you actually getting it, and you understand that there's something special you've got to contribute, and it's something special that is actually quite important to you, and it's an important part of your identity, and it's something that really needs to be respected. And that perhaps is something that you should be working on today. Not should, because with a Moon trine Sun, I shouldn't use the word should. I perhaps should use the word should. Perhaps I should say use the word can. Yes, you can. You have that opportunity. You have that possibility. And so I'm hoping, Virgo, that you're able to make the most of that opportunity. And the Moon and the Sun, they are actually making a trine towards Uranus in Taurus. So there's a certain grand trine energy here as well, in the earth signs, and Taurus and Virgo is an earth sign. So once you start the process going, once you start tuning into something that really is you, is all about what makes you special, then things should really start moving. And you might even sort of get a sense that you are in the right place, that you are actually fulfilling your destiny. Libra, you do appreciate your space at the moment. You want to be somewhere where you feel secure, where you're making the decisions, where you don't have to worry too much about other people's opinions and other people pressurizing you. And I think that that is absolutely fine. And I think that when you are doing things your own way, at your own pace, you're going to feel just really very comfortable. And you're going to be helped by a trine between the Moon in Capricorn and the Sun in Virgo. You do have a sense of where your own interests lie and what is best for you, and you shouldn't feel any great need to do things other people's way. Yeah, there might be pressure, and that pressure, you can consider the pressure, but you don't have to give in to anyone's pressure. You don't have to give in to what's coming in from the outside. So perhaps Libra, you should put yourself in a position where you're just not aware of pressure. So if in the past you've had certain people pressurizing you, maybe you should maybe block them, possibly. I mean, it depends who they are, and some people can't be blocked, but there's no need to give in to anyone else's pressure. And it's not about, being nice. I mean, I know that Librans like to be nice, but there's no need to be nice just for the sake of it. You should be nice if you want to be nice, and also you should be considering your own leading role. It can be you who takes the initiative. It can be you deciding what should be done and what shouldn't be done. So do look after your own interests. I think that is very important. Though, don't be too insular. I mean, there is a difference between safeguarding your own space, which is certainly a good thing to do, and completely shutting off the outside world and just taking the view you're not interested, perhaps even that you don't care. No, that's not what you should be doing. You certainly have to take an interest, but just because you take an interest doesn't necessarily mean that you're emotionally involved. I mean, curiosity and compassion are things which are very important. Curiosity and compassion are sort of two ways of taking an interest. As curiosity is simply wanting to know what's going to happen. It's sort of more of a mental thing, curiosity. Then compassion is about the emotional side of the equation, and that's important as well. And you do need to have an awareness of that. Especially as the moon is not just making a square to Venus, but it's making a square to Chiron. In fact, so Venus is actually moving towards an opposition of Chiron, and that Venus-Chiron opposition, I suppose, won't be exact until the beginning of next week, but you're probably starting to feel it, and you're starting to feel that in terms of the people around you, some people maybe are a bit under the weather, and there is a growing feeling of compassion. I don't think there's anything you need to do about it right now, but it's still there, and it's kind of getting a bit stronger. And so taking an interest in other people's issues, other people's problems, I think is important, but provided you don't get wrapped up in it. And a certain amount of separateness today is important. And, as I've already said, it is about your space, and it's your space that matters. And you certainly shouldn't feel guilty about safeguarding your own space. That can be a Libran issue, guilt. Sometimes with Librans, they can be made to feel guilty, that they're told they have to consider other people's needs. They shouldn't only look after themselves. But in this case, you can't really look after other people unless you first look after yourself. So I think that is going to be quite important. Now, continuing on the theme of other people and the world, I think that you can create the beginnings of a change in terms of how you relate to your community and just the group of people around you. You're starting to see it in a new way, and you may feel that something has to be transformed almost, that the ways in which you seek unity in the outside world, the way you look for union with other people, is perhaps needs to be shifted a bit. Perhaps you've been focusing on the wrong things, and maybe even on the wrong people, and so there may actually also be just a sense that there's something you're supposed to be doing with the wider group. Not that you're supposed to be doing it today, and it's not about you putting yourself out for anyone. It's just a feeling that your relationship to the group needs to be shifted, and it's not serving your interests right now, and it's not serving anyone's interests. So perhaps there are some shifts that are required in your social life, and that's perhaps something you can work on. But as I said right at the beginning, today I don't think you should feel obliged to do anything, and the most important thing is just feeling safe and secure. And if you're feeling safe and secure today, then you could say, well, it's job done. Scorpio, you may feel today that there is something that needs to be said. I mean, there was something that needed to be said yesterday as well. I think that yesterday was perhaps a little more pressured. I mean, because, yesterday we had Moon opposition Mars. Okay, if you're in, Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, you may still be feeling the pressure of the Moon-Mars opposition, but I think it's kind of fading a bit. I mean, I'm probably fading quite a lot, but I think that today there is less pressure, less aggravation, and I think that you're able to express yourself in a way that is probably more harmonious and is sort of more friendly, and I think that it's probably easier to be liked, and I think people will like you today. And that's because we've got the moon in Capricorn, but the moon is now making a trine to the sun, and that moon trine sun allows you to say things which don't get a negative reaction. You might have got a negative reaction yesterday. You might not have experienced a negative reaction, but I don't think that everything you said yesterday went down particularly well because of that moon opposition Mars. But now with the moon trine sun, you can actually create a real sense of togetherness around you, and I think that you're able to concentrate on people who are on your wavelength, and I think that your personality is going to be very much in evidence, but it's a side of your personality which is in harmony with the rest of the world. It's a side of your personality that people want to see and people want to know about, and so you're showing a face which does feel comfortable. And so in terms of your social life, I think that you can be successful. Of course, you may not feel that you want to be successful. Scorpios can be quite introspective, and they can be quite defensive as well, but I don't think there's any need to be defensive at the moment. I think that you're able to look after yourself, but also make an impression, and when there are people around you, I don't think you're going to feel threatened. You shouldn't feel threatened. Okay, you might feel threatened to begin with simply because you're dealing with something that you're not certain about. With uncertainty, we often feel threatened when we're uncertain, but if you make the effort, there will be a growing sense of familiarity and safety, and maybe even safety in numbers, that perhaps on your own there's a limit to what you can achieve, and maybe on your own you even perhaps have a little bit of vulnerability. But with the right people around you, you do feel that you're not alone, that you're actually part of something else, and so you can be a team player without compromising your individuality, without causing any sort of issues with security or with your own emotional or financial security. There's going to be no threats in that direction, I don't think. Though, as far as close relationships are concerned, the people that are very important to you, there might be a little bit of tension. The moon is making a square to Venus, and with that moon square Venus, something you say may be a little bit uneasy. It's like with people you don't know or don't know very well, it's very easy to talk. It's very easy, the words flow. But if you know someone very well, then it might not be so easy. It might be difficult to say the right thing, and even if usually it is, usually there are no problems, but for some reason there's a little bit of a clash here. So Scorpios, are well known for being able to deal with the silence, and perhaps when you're interacting with people you know very well, you share living space with, for example, maybe there's just nothing much that has to be said. If in doubt, don't say it. Just be there. Just enjoy the silence. So there is a contrast there, I think, between people you know well and people out there. And in certain situations, silence, I think, can be golden. Sagittarius. I think it can be a very productive day. But being a productive day doesn't necessarily mean that it's an interesting day. I mean, interesting in that typical Sagittarian way. Sagittarians can be very curious, they can like things to be exciting, and they can like action. And that's probably not about today's experience. So what we're talking about here is a trine aspect between the moon and the sun. So we've got moon in Capricorn, trine the sun in Virgo. And the sun in Virgo is very fortunate for you. It's a very nice place for the sun to be, because, as I've said on numerous occasions over the last couple of weeks, that Virgo is a part of your chart that is about being successful, that is about being noticed. Now, that's not normally how we see Virgo, but I'm looking at it from a Sagittarian perspective. And with the moon trine the sun, you're able to be sensible, you're able to be focused, and you're able to concentrate on what matters in, frankly, quite material way. I mean, there is an emphasis on the material today. I know that Sagittarius is a fire sign, it's not an earth sign, and sometimes you can be quite dismissive of money and the material side of things, but I don't think you should be dismissive at the moment, not least because Sagittarius, you can actually do things today which give you a boost in a material sense, and you might feel that no, there's nothing that can happen, but that's perhaps where the Sagittarian side of you needs to cut in. Because you are a Sagittarius, you need to have the vision to see what is possible on a material level, and that vision will guide you in terms of taking the concrete steps that can actually make things happen. And really things can happen, because we've got the moon in Capricorn, we've got the sun in Virgo, we've got Uranus in Taurus, we've got a kind of a grand trine there. And from a Sagittarian perspective, this grand trine is all about money, work, materialism, material details, organization. That's what it's all about. And if you can put your mind to it, then I think that you'll be surprised at what you can actually achieve. I think you can achieve a great deal. But it's not about excitement. It's just about having some plans and just proceeding with them, and things should really run very smoothly. And maybe you shouldn't allow yourself to be distracted. Yesterday I talked about the sun being square Jupiter, and that sun square Jupiter, it's still there. I mean, it's not exact, but it's still in operation. And it's possible that sun square Jupiter, that you might want to stir things up, you might get bored, or you might waste time with the wrong people in the wrong situations, and that could, I think, be an unfortunate distraction. And that might perhaps spoil the energy of this Earth Grand Trine. So don't be distractive. Don't allow your mind to wander. Just focus on what matters, and perhaps also consider the possibility that some people short term aren't much good for you. I mean, they may be fine for you. They might be maybe fine tomorrow. They may have been fine yesterday. But today, you perhaps need to choose your company carefully, because the wrong people could waste a lot of your time, and I think that would be a great shame. Though I think that if you feel that things aren't right, and you feel that you're not being treated with sufficient respect, you're basically able to say it and explain it how you see it. And I think you can be quite cutting with what you say. Yeah, your words can be powerful, and they can get straight to the point. And yeah, you could cause offence today. That is possible, but I don't think you need to cause offence unless it's really necessary. If, for example, you're being distracted, if people are trying to drag you off the path, then yeah, you can give them a piece of your mind. But I'm hoping that you can just today keep it simple and just take advantage of that trine between the moon and the sun, and I think that's the important point. And use that trine between the moon and the sun to allow you to just concentrate on the things that matter and the material detail. It's Friday, it's the end of a week. There are things you can sort out by the weekend. Just because it's Friday doesn't mean you have to slack off. So it should be an earthy and very useful day, but don't allow yourself to feel that because something is boring, you shouldn't be doing it. It's not boring. It might feel boring to begin with, but once you get going on it, you'll realize that everything is not just important, but everything has its own interest. You can find anything interesting, and if you're not distracted and you focus on the interesting things that matter, the interesting things that are important for your material well-being, then you're doing things right. Capricorn looks to me like being a good day, because the moon is still in your sign, and the moon is making a trine to the sun, and this moon trine sun, it's a nice aspect, and it allows things to move on, certainly in a material sense. You're going to have a good understanding of what matters in terms of money and career and business and all of those kind of details, if they're relevant. So you'll have a good sense of that. And at the same time, the moon and the sun are actually starting to make an aspect to Uranus, and so there is a sort of grand trine feel today, because you've got a grand trine across the earth signs, and Capricorn is an earth sign. So you feel perhaps that you can really get things moving on a sort of a material sense, and that you don't have to be satisfied with things as they were. And even though it is Friday, end of a week, that doesn't mean to say nothing is going on. Things definitely are going on, and you can ground yourself, and you can make new ideas useful. So ideas on their own are, of course, useless, but you can take an idea, take a concept, and actually make it work in the real world. And it will be surprisingly easy, and it will almost be surprisingly obvious. It may be a situation where you're dealing with something that no one else has really understood it. No one else has understood its implications and its potential. But Capricorn, you understand it immediately, and you are immediately able to put something into practice, and it will just be completely straightforward. And of course, you are helped by the fact that Venus is in mutual reception aspect with Saturn. So you've got a strong Venus, and that strong Venus is in Libra. Libra is the sign which is highest profile in your chart, and it is often connected. Libra is a high profile sign which is about success. Venus is in this sign. It's in mutual reception to Saturn, which is your ruler, and the moon in Capricorn is making a square to Venus. Now, when you hear the word square, you might think, oh, well, that's a difficult aspect, square. But in this case, no, because you've got moon in Capricorn, your sign. Then you've got Venus in Libra, which is a sort of very status-orientated sign, a success-orientated sign. So the moon is making that aspect to Venus. And so, because Venus is doubly strong, mutual reception to Saturn, and it's in Libra in its own sign. And I think that moon square Venus really does allow you to project yourself today. You can project your own interests, but in a way that doesn't rock the boat. Yeah, your motivations might be selfish. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with being selfish. They might be selfish, but I don't think they're going to appear to be selfish. I think that it will appear that you have got everyone's best interests at heart. And so, who's going to seriously resist you? I mean, who might? Well, I suppose you could say that we do have theoretically a T-square today, because Venus is opposition Chiron, and the moon is square Venus, and the moon is square Chiron. So you might say that Chiron is the problem. So what might Chiron represent? Chiron might represent a certain sense of obligation, a feeling that you have to look after private matters, perhaps relating to your family, and that they have to be addressed, and that you can't ignore them, and that might blunt your efforts to be successful in other parts of your life. That is a possibility, but with Moon making a square to Venus and a square to Chiron, it does seem that you're going to find a way round it. It seems that you can move in two opposite directions at once, and you're able to do this, through the stability of Moon in Capricorn and the organization of Moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn perhaps is going to allow you to an extent to sort of multitask a bit, maybe almost to be in two places at once, and I suppose you'll be helped if you just think about what are your priorities. Perhaps write down your priorities. Write down a list of your priorities and look at the top two priorities. The top two priorities may be in conflict with each other, or may seem to take over each other's space. But I think if you are very focused, I think that both priorities can be met, and no one's going to be complaining. And most importantly, I don't think that you will be complaining. You will feel that everything is covered, and you're not going to feel guilty that anyone's being ignored. So everything will be in place, and I think that in the end, it should be a day where, you can make everyone happy, you can make yourself happy, and I think that you can, accomplish a great deal, and that's the way it should be. And you won't be upsetting anyone. And again, it's the fact that you've got this moon trine the sun is really gonna help. You're not going to feel trapped, and you will feel a sense that it's a day in which you've used every opportunity, and that's a day where every opportunity has been used, where you've taken advantage of everything, has got to be a good day, hasn't it? Which underlines my point. Today can be a good day. In fact, today might be a great day. Aquarius, Moon continues moving through Capricorn, and with Moon moving through Capricorn, it's like you're not quite ready, and tomorrow might be easier, but maybe you should be ready, because you never know what might happen next, and you perhaps need to be ready for something happening suddenly. There may just be a situation where you have to be there and you have to take a responsibility, and that's what you've got to do. And it's, if you're not ready, you've missed a chance. So in other words, things can happen very suddenly. I don't mean that in a traumatic way, but if you're not prepared, then you might end up feeling disappointed that you just hadn't got it together. So when you look at today, consider, all the things that might happen. Doesn't mean to say that they will happen, but if you're always prepared, then there won't be that sense of disappointment. Okay, if nothing happens, it's quite possible nothing happens, but it may happen tomorrow, and perhaps that's just a state of mind you should perhaps be in. Of course, tomorrow, over the weekend, the moon moves into Capricorn. Moon moves into Aquarius, and things do change. And tomorrow is, of course, the weekend, and tomorrow we've got Venus trine Jupiter. Now, I'll be talking about Venus trine Jupiter in my reading for the weekend, but it is a very fortunate aspect. I think I mentioned this Venus trine Jupiter yesterday. Venus trine Jupiter, it's getting stronger and stronger. Venus is less than 2 degrees from Jupiter, and Venus is in Libra, Jupiter is in Gemini, and of course these are both these planets are making a trine aspect to Aquarius. And so there is this sense, Aquarius, that good fortune is coming your way. It may not be ready for you yet, but you need to be prepared for it. And so don't look at the world at face value and think nothing is going to happen. There's no point in being there. There's no point in making the effort. There is certainly a point in making the effort, and even if nothing happens, it's like it's kind of like a negative, sort of a positive insurance policy, isn't it? When you think of an insurance policy, you take out insurance because you're afraid of something bad happening, and you assume that nothing bad will happen. That's the assumption. On the other hand, what about a positive insurance policy? A positive insurance policy is just in case something good happens. But you take out an insurance policy just in case something good happens. And this is the insurance policy which goes back to what I was saying about being ready. And just in case that Venus trine Jupiter decides to kick into action today, Friday, from over the weekend. Of course, it might not kick into action at all. That is the problem with astrology. That is the problem with trying to predict fortunate events. It's always a problem. When I first started learning astrology, when I did my first charts, I would look at Venus and Jupiter aspects, and when I used to do written charts, really did me in writing written charts. But I suppose it's actually a very good way to learn astrology, doing written charts, because there's a system to it. But I would exaggerate Jupiter transits, because the textbook Jupiter transit should be good, and of course I would promise things which realistically couldn't really happen, and that is the problem. And so when I say that there's a Venus Jupiter trine, I think it can work very well for you, but I don't want to set you up for disappointment. So I really do want to emphasize that. But you just got to put yourself in a position where potentially you could take advantage of it. And do try to be relaxed. I think that is important today. I think that some Aquarians may be feeling quite tense. You may be feeling that you do want something to happen, and you can feel it, and it's at the same time going to be easy for you to overreact. And so somehow you've got to get over this tension and not do things which could be a destructive channel for the tension. And I suppose when you think about destructive channels for tension, I suppose you can consider maybe sort of dangerous activities, doing things you shouldn't be doing, taking too much exercise, using machinery that you don't fully understand, the way you drive. So look at all for all the ways in which your own inner tension could be transferred into the outside world perhaps in a destructive way. And perhaps you also, Aquarius, need to consider what this tension is about. I think there is actually, Aquarius, a strong desire for independence. And I think that you're not going to take kindly to anyone interfering with your life and your schedule. And if anyone gets too close, you might snap. That's certainly possible. But you perhaps have got to instead focus on the good and the life-affirming, and which takes me back to that Venus trine Jupiter. Venus trine Jupiter can actually be about people being useful. Not just useful, they can be pleasant and they can make you happy. And Venus trine Jupiter can actually be good for relationships of all kinds. So don't exclude other people and don't get too obsessed about your own independence. I mean, whatever happens, you are going to be able to maintain your independence, but independence is not like a brick wall. It shouldn't be seen like that, and I think you understand that. But don't be too precious about always being in control today. Pisces, there is a rather nice trine aspect between the moon and the sun. And the sun is in Virgo, the moon is in Capricorn, and I think that this trine aspect probably relates to other people, and I think that your relations with other people should, I think, be fairly harmonious, and it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with people one-to-one or in a group. You're just going to be able, I think, in most cases, to just fit in, and at the same time, you can be yourself, and you don't have to change your behavior just because you're surrounded by people. You can be forthright. You can say what's on your mind, and I think if you say what's on your mind with power and conviction, people will appreciate it. Okay, you might get feedback. You might experience other people's energy. You might find out what's on their mind, and it might be quite enlightening to find out what is bothering another person. But there's no need for tension, there's no need for aggravation, and you're going to be helped by the fact that Venus is starting to move towards a trine to Jupiter. So this Venus trine Jupiter, which is exact over the weekend, is now less than 2 degrees apart, and I think that this Venus trine Jupiter is really going to help you. It's going to give you a boost, and it could actually make you more emotionally aware, and also it's going to give you a sense of what other people are feeling, and you're able, in terms of your social interactions, to give people space. So if someone is talking to you, even if it's just for a short period of time, you're able to give someone your total attention, or at least that's how it feels, and you're able to give someone the space to communicate what they really feel. And I think that is going to be very much appreciated. So even if you're dealing with subject matter which is quite difficult, you can still do it. And so on many levels today, I do think that your social skills are going to be very good. And remember that Venus trine Jupiter. Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn, which is, of course, Saturn is in your sign, and that Venus is trine Jupiter. So it's really good for dealing with people, understanding other people, and, or as they say, coming alongside another person. Isn't that what they say when in psychotherapy courses? You've got to come alongside the client, whatever that means. I never quite understood it, but then psychotherapy is not really my thing. But if it is possible to come alongside someone, then today I think it really is. And maybe you're going to be helped by the fact that the moon is square Chiron and the moon is square Venus. And so, a square does indicate a little bit of tension, but Chiron is about healing and understanding what's bothering people. And of course, what's bothering people, Chiron is in Aries. Chiron is in quite a material sign from a Pisces perspective. What's bothering some people may just be money. People think there's all sorts of in-depth psychological issues, but it may be money. There are people out there who've got financial worries and issues, and even if you're not a genius when it comes to personal finance, I think that something you can say can actually help people deal with their financial issues. So overall, Pisces, I think it's a day when you can actually be very useful. When you just feel that your purpose is perhaps to make other people's lives better, and you can do it, but in such a way that doesn't exhaust you. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 57, which is the gentle. And the gentle it's often about finding the root cause of things, and often finding the root cause of things which are making our lives difficult. And we have to go through something. It's like the wind. It's the wind going through a house, going through all the rooms of a house, trying to find something, and it goes everywhere. It goes through every nook and cranny, under the beds, through the furniture, under the floorboards. It's just looking for something. It's looking for the problem. And that's perhaps what we're trying to do. And it kind of starts off as quite innocuous. We're just looking for where the issue is. But as it progresses, things can become more complicated, and they can actually become quite sort of dangerous. And we have two moving lines here. Now, the second line moves, and this is quite a positive line. It indicates that we've got a problem, and I'm not saying we've got a problem. Maybe we haven't got a problem. And just remember, I might be talking about something very trivial. Depends what's going on in your life. You have to, it may be some very small area of your life which is not in itself particularly important, but maybe of short-term concern. But the second hexagram moves, and that indicates, the second line of the hexagram, moves, and that suggests that we are able to get to the bottom of things. We're able to actually start to find out what the real cause is, what is really making things difficult. And we might then feel a certain sense of relief that we finally understood it, we've confronted it, and things are now open, that we can start to make good progress. But then the top line moves, and the top line moves, you move from the second line, which is at a relatively early stage of the situation, but then you move to the top line, and that's often an issue where we see perhaps real conflict here, and we may be becoming close to something which is just too much for us. I think perhaps the advice here is that maybe it's possible to ask too many questions. If we knew how bad things were in the world, for example, if we knew, if we're into conspiracy theories, if we knew what governments were really doing, it would completely freak us out. But perhaps that's always been the case, and it may just be about everything we do. If we knew if we really knew what the situation was, then we would completely freak out. So maybe it's dangerous to ask too many questions. It's dangerous to get too close to the source of things. And that's a difficult thing for me to say as a Gemini. As a Gemini, I like to know the answers. I like to know what's going on. But sometimes we can know too much. And if we know too much, the way we respond might be over the top, and it might just make things worse. And whatever this sort of negative energy is, as soon as we know about this negative energy might sort of go into overdrive. And so we do have to be very careful about dealing with the root of the problem. At first we might feel, oh, it's good, we're making progress, we understand what the root of the problem is. But once we understand the root of the problem, the basic root of the problem, we don't want to ask too many questions. We don't want to go into it much further, because if we go into it much further, we might find a whole new level of corruption and decay and evil that we just really don't want to deal with. And it's possible that our response may actually be worse than the problem itself. And so maybe we should just be happy with a little bit of knowledge. Now, this hexagram, the gentle, does move, because we've got two moving lines, and it moves to hexagram number 39, which is obstruction. It's not a great hexagram, and it's about being in a situation where we certainly can't go forward. We are being blocked if we go forward. We're not going to make any progress. And it's just too difficult. Every footstep is hard work. And the best option might be to either stay where we are until the situation starts to resolve, or perhaps just to go back. There's no disgrace in turning back. So, overall, when we look at this reading for today, we start with the gentle. We're trying to understand something. We ask too many questions, and we just start to we create a situation for ourselves, but just becomes increasingly muddy, and we just can't make progress. And in the end, I think it's best to just back off. But just a reminder, this is a reading just for one day, just for today, and tomorrow, Saturday, tomorrow is another day. So now I want to look at snakes. I don't know how this is going to work, but I was just interested by this snake bite of this man Jeffrey Leibowitz, which the snake community is has gone into overdrive about. And so he was bitten at 2 o'clock in the morning in South Carolina by his pet inland taipan, and he is still alive. He is improving, but Jeffrey Leibowitz. But I heard that he's suffering from renal failure. This poison acts very quickly. He didn't actually get an antivenom for 12 hours. And so I'm not going to say very much about this particular chart because I don't have his horoscope. But here is the chart, I think, for when Jeffrey Leibowitz was bitten, and it said around 2 o'clock. So we could say that the midheaven was probably sort of very late Pisces. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. And Jeffrey Leibowitz, by the way, he's 58 years old. You can see his videos. There's this picture of him just with this huge rattlesnake, handling it, just perhaps being overly relaxed. I think there was a picture of him actually pushing this baby, this juvenile inland taipan in a pool of water and trying to get it to, I don't know what he was trying to do, get it to drink or moisturize the skin or whatever, but there was no, he wasn't using tools or anything. He just seemed to be using his hands. And yeah, the snake community are really upset about it because they feel that their own licensing could be removed, and that, it is a threat to them. These people are supposed to be responsible and whatever. I mean, I don't know. But so Neptune was sort of close to the midheaven. So I suppose the idea of someone making a mistake with their pet inland taipan is quite possible with Neptune on the midheaven. The moon is in Libra, 18 Libra. So what that's telling us is that the moon has just gone into the Via Combusta. So the Via Combusta is between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. And when you've got the moon in the Via Combusta, things can just happen. We might think everything's straightforward, but we should have a plan B, and we shouldn't expect everything to just go as normal. He'd handled this inland taipan before. Apparently it's quite a docile snake. It doesn't want to bite. That's his view. He doesn't want to bite. It's not going to bite me because it doesn't. What's the benefit? But anyway, it bit him. So, and the moon is applying to a trine of Jupiter. Now we might now be seeing the moon trine Jupiter in a different light. Moon trine Jupiter may be about something happening. That's when it happens. It happens when there's the event, moon trine Jupiter, and so that is perhaps the snakebite, Jupiter in the 12th. So that's a chart. Okay, because you got Pluto in the 8th, and the moon. You've got Cancer rising, so the ruler of the Cancer ascendant is the moon, and the moon is in the moon is in the Via Combusta, and so yeah, I mean that sort of makes sense. But it's a chart that I find it difficult to say much about because I don't have Jeffrey Leibowitz's horoscope, and I was thinking about doing this video just on Jeffrey Leibowitz, and I find I've got nothing to say because I don't have his birth chart. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at people who have been killed by snakes, usually herpetologists. I think all of them are, except in sort of one case. So there was a man called Kevin Budden. Now, apparently Kevin Budden, he was born on December 27th, 1930. I think obviously in Australia. I don't have his time of birth. and he is seen as being something of a hero in the snake community because he died. He was 19 when he died of a. He was 19 when he actually died from a bite. I think it was maybe a coastal taipan that killed him, not an inland taipan. But there was no antivenom. He died in the late 50s, and so. But he wanted to get hold of a taipan so that it could be used to create antivenom. So he was actually working on helping to create an antivenom even at the young age of 19. And that this is his chart. So we don't know the time of birth, but here is someone who has Jupiter. He had a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in his chart in Cancer, and Saturn was that conjunction. So I suppose when you see Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, I know it's not an exact Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, but here is someone that was, I suppose, dedicated to self-improvement. That might be how you see it. And, look at that Mercury opposition Pluto. Mercury opposition Pluto could be someone who was just really obsessed at a really young age with something. And Mercury opposition Pluto, he's obsessed with snakes and he wants to really focus on it. And even after he got bitten, he put this coastal taipan in a bag and told the person who gave him medical help to make sure that the snake got taken to some research facility so that they could do work on it. Now, as far as when he was bitten, this was when he got bitten, and looking at the astrology of the snakebite. So looks like there was a moon. I don't know exactly when he was bitten. There seemed to be a Moon-Venus opposition that was on his sun. Perhaps I kind of get the feeling here with some of these charts that there is an association perhaps with Venus and snakes. I'm not quite sure why. Venus does seem to crop up in these charts quite a lot. But Mars was at Mars. Where was Mars? Mars at the time of the snake bite was at 21 Libra. So so Mars was at 21 Libra. So Mars was actually on his Mercury node midpoint. So he had Mercury square the nodes. You can see in his natal chart. So Mercury square the node is. And I suppose Mercury-Pluto square the node. So there is that sort of grand cross he has between the nodes and Mercury and Pluto. So I suppose it was kind of his destiny to really study something intensely. And with that Mercury-Pluto, then Mars hit that grand trine. Hit that grand cross. So he had Mars was on his nodal axis. Mars was square his Pluto. Mars was on his Mercury-Pluto, was actually on his Mercury-Pluto midpoint, and that's all it took. And that's when he had the bite, and that's when he died. And looking at another person who died, I don't think it's not the chart of the bite that matters, but it's more his attitude to being bitten. And he was Carl Schmitt, and Carl Schmitt was he was American in spite of his name. He wasn't German. He was American, and he was a herpetologist. And the bite itself, for his chart, I haven't really got a great deal to say about it, except that I think Saturn was square his black moon Lilith. But the point about this chart is his Gemini, and I think his chart does tell us about how Gemini can work. So here's a herpetologist with Sun, North Node, Mercury, Pluto, Neptune in Gemini. That Gemini seems to dominate that chart. And with Sun in Gemini, perhaps conjunct with North Node, there is a great sense of curiosity there. That's perhaps Gemini at its best. You want to understand things, and you want to see how things work. That could be how Gemini works. And he had sort of North Node trine Uranus, and so he had a boom slang, and a boom slang is this very venomous snake, but it has its fangs at the back of its mouth, and so it doesn't always get to bite. But he got bitten by a boom slang, and he died very, very quickly. He died, I think, the same day he was bitten. And so, looking at his bite, this is the chart that. This is the chart of the bite. I didn't see anything particularly dramatic in terms of transits about the bite. There was a Mercury opposition Black Moon Lilith, but I didn't really seem to affect his chart in particular. But so when he got bitten, he started to get really ill really quickly. But as he was getting sick, he was taking notes. He was observing what was happening to him. And at a certain stage, he was asked whether he wanted to go to hospital, and he said he didn't. And the reason he didn't want to go to hospital is because he wanted to have a record of exactly what was happening to him when he was being bitten by this snake, simply from the perspective of scientific research. It would spoil the research if he went to hospital, and that seems to be Gemini. That's Gemini taking things to kind of a new level. Although it may say something about the mentality of people that keep snakes, that perhaps death is just something that snake keepers and herpetologists are sort of aware of, and so when it happened, he wanted to just continue with his research. Yeah, he didn't want to spoil it. So anyway, he died very soon after he was bitten. And another person who was bitten by a snake and who died was Robert Mertens. That he was German. He was born in St. Petersburg. Again, I don't have a time of birth for him. So here's his chart. He was really into snakes, and he had an exact Sun-Venus conjunction opposition Pluto. This sort of further supports my idea that Venus does have a connection with snakes. I don't know quite what the logic for that might be. But Sun-Venus conjunction, opposition Pluto. Remember how we saw with Kevin Budden, the Australian who died at 19, how he had Mercury opposition Pluto. Now he has Venus opposition Pluto, and sort of Venus widely opposition Neptune. So he was born December the 1st, 1894, Sagittarius, and he has Mercury in Scorpio. I mean, that might be another sort of link there. Mercury in Scorpio, what his interests are. There's something quite Scorpio-like about a snake. And I think he was bitten by a savanna twig snake. And he did take longer to die. And this I think he was bitten in Frankfurt in Germany. And so looking at the bite, not the death, I think he died around August the 5th. He died, I think, 18 days afterwards. And so this is a very easy one. So at the time he was bitten, I mean, he was quite old. He was sort of I think he was 80 years old when he was bitten. So Neptune was at 9-5 Sagittarius. So Neptune was exactly conjunct his Sun-Venus conjunction, and Neptune was opposition his Pluto, and I suppose you could throw in transiting Black Moon Lilith was square his Sun-Venus conjunction. So that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Neptune on your Sun, being bitten by a snake. He was feeding this whatever savannah twig snake or whatever it was, and it bit him, and he died. And I think he was quite philosophical about it. I think he said, maybe after he was bitten, he said words to the effect that, this is the way for herpetologists to die, is almost as if it's the right way for a herpetologist to die. So again, this idea that life and death may be very much part of a herpetologist's view of the world, particularly if they're dealing with poisonous snakes. And yes, his Sun-Venus conjunction was opposition Pluto. And sort of more recently, there was a snake expert who died who was killed in Burma, and he was bitten by a crate. And again, I don't have a time of birth. Joseph Slowinski. So he was born in 1962, and here's his chart. You can see a load of planets in Scorpio, Mercury in Scorpio, and Venus in Scorpio, Sun in Scorpio, and he was on an expedition in Myanmar, and he saw a small crate, and he wasn't sure if it was poisonous, and yes, it bit him, and he died. He had the misfortune he died on 9/11. So he was bitten by the snake bite happened on he was bitten on 9/11. I think he was bitten on September the 11th, 2001, and he wasn't bitten in Rangoon, Myanmar, but because it's a flat chart, he was born somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Myanmar in the jungle. And I didn't notice anything particularly dramatic about the chart, except for the position of Mars. So Mars, remember, Mars was when 9/11 happened, Mars was at around 1 Capricorn. So he has his Mars at 16.6 Leo. So he had Mars sesquiquadrate his natal Mars. And so that was the main transit when he died of a crate bite. Now, there is a snake handler. I don't think he was a herpetologist, but he was someone who just played with snakes, and he was from Malaysia, and he was Ali Khan Samsudin. And I think Ali Khan Samsudin would do stuff like be in a room full of snakes and maybe scorpions as well, and he was doing some kind of exhibition demonstration, and he was bitten by a king cobra and he died. And so here is Ali Khan Samsudin's horoscope, and he's got Mars Saturn. Now he's got a Mars Saturn conjunction. A wide Mars-Saturn conjunction, 12 degrees off. But if you take the midpoint of his Mars-Saturn conjunction was 13 degrees Sagittarius. So that means he had Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, you could say that's how he makes his money, how he makes his living. Snakes, it's poisonous snakes. One thinks about death. He makes his living by being close to death, by playing with things which are incredibly dangerous. And I think that might be how Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint works. And of course, he's not a herpetologist. So he's not doing it because he's necessarily interested in snakes in an academic way, like all of these other people we've been talking about, it's perhaps part of his job. It's part of the performance, and he did performances, and I think he was bitten during a performance, and so hence that's perhaps how Jupiter worked. And so Pluto is kind of square his Mars, but it's not exactly square his Mars. And as far as the snakebite itself is concerned, Venus was exactly on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so, again, if you take Venus as being a representative of snakes, you could say Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, then I suppose death by snakes, assuming you take Venus as having a special association with snakes. And that's just I mean, that might be speculation, but I think that is a possibility. So that's Ali Khan Samsudin. And I want to finish with Steve Irwin, who did not die by snakebite. He, of course, was killed by the stingray, and I don't think it was the poison in the stingray that killed him. It was the fact that it caused damage to his heart. So here is Steve Irwin's natal chart, and perhaps it's not surprising that Steve Irwin has Pluto on the midheaven. The midheaven is his career and his work. I know he did a zoo, and he had a zoo, and it wasn't just snakes, it was crocodiles and all sorts of other stuff. But Pluto on the midheaven, to my mind, does sort of fit his profession. So that does make sense. He has the sun quite close to the fixed star Fomalhaut, which is the mouth of the fish. So in terms of what happened and what the transits were, there certainly were some transits. Now, a thing about Steve Irwin's chart is he has Mars square Neptune, and Mars conjunct the South Node. And I think that Mars square Neptune, I mean, I don't really know much about his life, aside from, there are lots of videos of him playing with snakes. But Mars square Neptune may say something about where he wants to put his energy into, putting one's energy into snakes, poisonous animals, whatever. That does seem to be a way in which Mars square Neptune could be utilized. Of course, he wasn't a herpetologist. He was, I don't know, I certainly don't know a great deal about him, but he wasn't an academic. And so that's where he puts his energy in Mars square Neptune. And turning to the positions of the planets when he died. So Steve Irwin and let's find his. Okay, so what was happening when he died. Now, I've set the coordinate. I mean, I had to do this. I went for Cairns, Australia, but then I did actually manually alter the coordinates to make sure that it was configured with the reef. Was it Bar Reef or something where he died? So at the time of his death, look at Jupiter. Jupiter was at 1352 Scorpio. So Jupiter was exactly conjunct his Neptune, and of course he had Mars square Neptune in his natal chart, and at the same time he had transiting. If you look at transiting Neptune was pretty close to the conjunction with his Mars, so there was a sort of a Jupiter-Neptune square there. Neptune fairly close to his Mars, Jupiter exactly on his Neptune, and he had Saturn conjunct his North Node. So I suppose North Node is what he wants to do, where he wants to go, and Saturn finally brings the whole thing to an end. And looking at his solar returns. So I say two solar returns because solar return we have his regular solar return for 2006 when he died. Venus on the descendant. Now normally you'd think, with a death, you'd think Uranus on the descendant, but Venus on the descendant, it's just about, I don't know, just this association, Venus, not just snakes, but just animals like stingrays and snakes, Venus on the descendant, maybe. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. And with this solar return, the thing about this solar return is, but it's exactly on the last quarter. It's a last quarter moon. So he had his solar return February 21st, 2006, last quarter moon, waning moon. Last quarter moon, that might be, we're moving towards the end of the cycle, moving perhaps towards the end of his cycle. And this full moon was linked with Mars. So Mars was opposition the moon at the time of the solar return, and the sun was square. Sun was square Mars, moon was square the sun. So I think that gives an indication that it might have been quite a dangerous year for him. Turning to his converse solar return, in other words, I think he was 44 when he died, so 44 years before he was born would be his solar return for 1918. And we see Mars coming up again, this time not Venus on the descendant, but Mars is on the descendant, and Mars is square Pluto. Pluto on the IC, Mars. So Mars, Pluto again. I think if you compare those two solar returns, the converse and the direct solar returns, you perhaps get an indication of something bad might happen in that year. And finally, there's his solar arc direction, so moving all the planets 44 degrees on. So here are his solar arc directions, and I don't want to spend any time on this really, but the point to focus on is that his solar arc directed ascendant was at 1458 Aquarius. So it was moving to the conjunction of his Mars. So again, that suggests something quite angry and violent, and that would of course link with this stingray. So anyway, those are a few people who were killed by snakes, and of course in Steve Irwin's case, he was killed by a stingray. But obviously Steve Irwin was very much associated with snakes during his life. I don't know whether I'm reading too much into things, but I suppose the takeaway is that it does seem that some of these herpetologists have close Pluto aspects in their chart. Of course, Steve Irwin was not a herpetologist, but he did have Pluto on the midheaven. And I'm also wondering if Venus has an association with snakes. That's something we have to give it some more thought. Anyway, I hope you found that video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.